I'm excited to share with you guys. We've been doing our Dreaming Big series, and we have these little, things you can take where you can take notes, because this is kind of like our series to dream big, and then at the end we're going to ask you guys to kind of give, either with time or finances, and you're going to write that down, and then we're going to burn it in a fire pit that I'm going to bring from home, so then no one knows. It's just between you and God, so I'm really excited about that. And today we're dreaming big for the wise. Put wise because I couldn't put oldies, and then unpacking this message I realized it wasn't just for oldies, but now I've said oldies, so now I don't know if let's keep going. Moving on. First thing I need to do is I want to thank you, Kim, for saving the message. So, Kim saved it. We were sitting down, and I was telling her about the message I had planned, and she goes, "Matt, you've done that one before." I said, "No, you're wrong. Never done this one before. I don't remember that." I said, "Matt, I promise. You have. You've done that same story with that same angle." "No, I haven't." And I went and looked, and I was like, she's right. I was like, fine, I got to find something completely different. I got to throw everything out. Because no, what about this? She's like, "I've always wanted this." And we started talking, and she gave me another idea. So thank you for saving the message. She would be up here sharing, but she struggles to talk in front of people, but she's apparently a good singer because she can close her eyes. So, yeah. But I guess I'm really glad Big Matt, my friend Big Matt, gave me the ride to the airport almost 13 years ago now to fly over here and marry Kim. So I'm really glad that happened because she saves me in lots of ways. But today, we're looking at a story of Eli and Samuel. This is found in 1 Samuel chapter 3, verses 1 to 18, and that's what I want to look at. So, but before we look at it, I want to set the stage a bit. Because I feel like we need to do that. Instead of just jumping in out of nowhere and me plucking something, I want to set the scene a little bit. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background. The first thing is Shiloh, which is where this story takes place. This was Israelites' central sanctuary during the pre-monarchic period. So before there were kings, before the temple was built, this was like the Jerusalem. This was where everyone went. The Ark of God. The tabernacle was here. It was a central sanctuary. And this is where this story takes place. And the guy Eli that we'll hear about in the story was the high priest of Shiloh. He was the second to last Israelite judge. So before Israelite had kings, they had judges who would decide things. And Eli was one of the last. Another thing about Eli is earlier in Samuel, we read about how Eli blessed Hannah's prayers for her son. She couldn't have a son, and she was one wife to a guy, and he had another wife that could have lots of kids and liked to rub it in her face. And Hannah cried out pleading. Eli thought she was drunk at first, and then realized she wasn't. And he blessed her to have a son, who she pledged to the service of God after he was weaned. And she did that. And the kid's name was Samuel. And that's who we read about in this story. He's been with Eli probably from like the age of 4-ish. Maybe even a little bit younger than that, depending when he got weaned. And he gets dropped off at the tabernacle to be work in service of God. And another thing we're going to know before we read the story is Eli's worthless sons. Sounds bad saying that, but that's what the story picks them out as. So much so that there was this tradition that the priest and stuff, they wouldn't have a job. Their job was the tabernacle, right? So they would get some food from the offerings. How it worked was typically the food would get cooked. And then they take a big giant fork, and they pluck it in there, and they pull it out, and the meat that comes out on it was for the priest. Sometimes wasn't the best meat. So his two sons didn't like this. So one of the many things that they did is they decided, hey, before you cook the meat, we want to cut off the fat. Otherwise, we won't accept it. We want to cut off the best bit of meat. And they would deny people from giving their offerings unless they did that. So they did lots of stuff to corrupt this sacred practice, to benefit from it, to make sure there was money going into their pockets. And the story paints them out as really worthless, really missing the mark again and again and again. And it's funny too, because the story points out how Eli knew about this. Everyone would complain. But Eli wouldn't really do too much. He protected his sons. He didn't want them to get hurt. He didn't let them discover the hard truth. He would kind of go up to him and go, "Oh, you better not do that again," and then walk away and turn his back. He wouldn't really step up. He was missing it. And that's kind of all the stuff that happens before we get to this story I want to look at today. So let's dive into that. Let's dive into 1 Samuel chapter 3, verses 1 to 18. This is what we read. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli. And the word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no frequent vision. At that time, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim, so that he could not see was lying down in his own place. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord where the ark of God was. I kind of love this because you kind of even get this feeling that Samuel's wanting something more, something deeper. So he's sleeping by the ark of God. He's wanting something more. He's itching for it. And our story goes on to tell us what happens as he's sleeping in the ark of God. Then the Lord called Samuel and said, "Here I am." And he ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call you. Lie down again." So he went away and lay down. And the Lord called again, "Samuel." And Samuel arose and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call you, my son. Lie down again." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. I kind of love how it's pointing out how Samuel doesn't know how to hear that divine voice yet. He hasn't been able to really tap into that. Hasn't been revealed to him yet. He's still learning. He's young in his ministry. So that's why at first he doesn't recognize. He keeps running to Eli. "Oh, Eli must need something. He's blind. Maybe he's got to use the toilet or something." And so he sprints to Eli. And I love what our story tells us next. And the Lord called Samuel again the third time, and he arose and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called." Then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, "Go lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant hears.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. And the Lord came and stood, calling as at other times, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant hears." Then the Lord said to Samuel, "Behold, I am about to do a thing in Israel, which the 2 ears of everyone who hears it will tingle. On that day I will fulfill against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house, from beginning to end. And I declare to him that I am about to punish his house forever for the iniquity that he knew, because his sons were blaspheming God, and he did not restrain them. Therefore I swear to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be atoned for by sacrifice or offering forever." Now imagine if you're Samuel hearing that about a bloke you look up to. And Eli got it wrong with his sons. We read that, but it's pretty clear Eli didn't get it wrong with Samuel. He had this good influence with Samuel, which would obviously be someone that not only Samuel probably looked up to as a mentor, he probably cared about. And the thing that was spoken about Eli was the fact that he was going to die and his 2 kids were going to die on the same day. That's a heavy thing to hear. That's why I think it's, fitting what we read next in the story. So Samuel lay until morning. Then he opened the doors of the house of the Lord, and Samuel was afraid to tell the vision to Eli. But Eli called Samuel and said, "Samuel, my son." And he said, "Here I am." And Eli said, "What was it that he told you? Do not hide it from me. May God do so to you and more also if you hide anything from me of all that he told you." So Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him. And he said, "It is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him." It would have been a tough thing for Eli to hear. Tough thing for Samuel to say. So it's a tough, hard conversation. And I think oftentimes we read this story and we forget something about Samuel, who's really influential in the Old Testament. And that's Eli's influence on Samuel. We don't read a lot about it because shortly after this, everything that God told Samuel happens. Eli's 2 sons die in battle. The ark of God gets lost. When Eli hears about this, he falls out of his throne and lands on his head and dies. So all this stuff happened shortly after. But Eli did have an influence on Samuel, a really good one. And I believe we discover through his small part in the story of Samuel is something that he knew. And that was how the wise can help others hear the divine voice. I've help in red because I don't like help as the word, because it's not really help. It's more getting out of the way of God than anything else and humbling ourselves. But that was a bit harder to put in, so I just went with help. And we're going to put it in red to remind myself of that. But he knew this. He knew that the deep voice of God constantly speaking to all of us. But too many of us can't hear it over all the noise, and he knew how to help with that. And you might be thinking, well, that's great for Eli, but how do we help others lean in to hear? You know, how do we humble ourselves and get out of the way of God to help others hear what the divine voice might be telling them? And I think I say we, because in doing this, I've discovered something about wisdom and the wise. Wisdom is both life experience and it's a gift from God. Sometimes God can gift young people with wisdom beyond their years. We hear about it in Scripture over and over again. And then wisdom comes from our life experience, from the things we go through, our journey of faith that we can share, like Liz was talking about in our community. And I'm going to look at these 2 ways because I think we pick up these 2 ways in the story of Eli and his influence on Samuel. So 2 ways we can help others hear the divine voice. The first is admitting we don't have the answers. That's a hard one to do, especially if you're a bloke in the room like me who just wants to fix stuff and paid all this money to learn the Bible so I can have the answers from people. To realize I don't have many answers and I have more questions than answers doesn't make you feel good on the inside. We have to admit that. We have to admit we don't have the answers. And I know Kim's going to use this against me later when I forget about it. So there you go, Kim, you got some ammo. But to help you understand what I mean, a conversation with Pop brings some head. So Pop was my grandfather-in-law? Pop. I said Pop. Pop. Yeah. Pop. But he was my grandfather-in-law. He kind of took me in as soon as I came here. He would often have chats with me in his office. He told me I was like family before me and Kim were even married at 19. Like I got off the plane and I didn't know where I was, and they showered me with meat pies and made me watch The Castle. I'm really thankful for that experience too. It helped me understand Australia a lot. But one conversation in particular rings in my head, and I wish my brain worked better so I could remember everything that was said. But I remember he took me to his office and he said, "Matt, I need to have a chat with you." Basically, the chat was that me and Kim could no longer stay with him. We had Caleb with us, but Nana and Pop were running out of money. They wanted to sell their own home because they're old and wanted to go into retirement living. That was their plan. They didn't plan to have two 19-year-old kids and a child dumped on them. They pretty much funded most of us while we were trying to get a job, and I would go out and look. They were amazing and went above and beyond. But the way Pop made it out in that conversation was they just couldn't do it anymore. The funds were drying up. I still remember talking to Pop, and it was a hard conversation. I took a couple breaths, and I'm like, all right, Pop, when do you need this out by? In my head, this is like a Monday. So in my head, I'm thinking, all right, he's giving me like 3 weeks notice. I can work with that. He goes, by Saturday. I only just got a job like a couple days ago. Pizza Hut. Like, I don't know many people that are going to rent to someone who works at Pizza Hut casually. And I was really stressed. And Pop didn't give me the answers. He didn't say it was going to be all right. But he shared where he had lived experience, where God showed up. He shared that he knew and trusted that God had something for Kim and me. He filled me with hope by not giving me an answer, by not telling me what to do, by saying he couldn't do anything else. But he knew God had something. That encouraged me to lean in, which didn't let me to call a guy I only met once and say, hey, can we live with you? Because he jokingly offered, and we lived with him for a couple months while we worked on getting our own place. But none of that would have happened without the hope that Pop gave me. From a hard conversation where he had to admit he didn't have the answers, which I knew was hard because they loved Kim and me and Caleb. They went above and beyond. Her Nana, up until they passed away, would come with her walker to help Kim clean the house. She was this lady of gold. Like, oh my goodness. They were amazing people. And I knew it would have hurt them to have to sit with a 19-year-old kid and say, we can't help you anymore. To give that hard truth, to admit he didn't have the answers. But he was able to do that. And then he was able to help me find hope by giving me some of his lived experience, by sharing that with me. So that's one of the first things we can do. The second thing is a willingness to have hard conversations that connect to the heart. And you can see Pop would have done that in his conversation with me. But one conversation, just to prove it's not an age thing, that really rings in my head, was a car chat with Big Matt. So Big Matt's, I got a tattoo on my back calf that says big. He's got little, so we're always together. He's my friend since like grade 5. Man, guy's a legend. Love him so much. Such a good friend. But I still remember he gave me a ride to the airport when I was 19, about to come over here to marry him. The lead up, the 2 weeks I gave my parents notice was a bit chaotic. Had my dad not want to give me my passport because he was worried about me because I only had like $400 after I bought my plane ticket, which is probably fair enough for a dad to be worried about what his son's going to do. I had my mom I had to go visit who was in tears. I had friends and family upset with the decision I made, struggling with it, saying, what's going to happen, Matt? Like, you're going over there. How are you going to make it? All this stuff. And my dad wouldn't take me to the airport. I couldn't find many friends to give me a ride, but Big Matt was one of them. So he gave me a ride to New Orleans, which is about an hour and a half from Mobile, because that's where I was flying out of. And we're driving in the car, and we pull up, and he was just going to drop me off because, we're young adults. We don't have lots of money, so we can't pay for parking. So he's just pulling me up in the drop-off zone, feeling really bad about it. And I can't get out. I look at him and say, Big Mac, I can't do it. Because what do you mean? I said, I'm an idiot. It's like, how do I know any of this is going to work? Like, I don't know anything. I'm giving up studying nursing, 2 jobs that I worked. Like, what's going to happen when I get over there? I know nothing about Australia. What if I don't have enough money for my visa? What if I don't have enough money for this? What if I get it wrong with Kim again? What if her parents still don't like me? What if I mess up with being a dad? And I'm just going through and through all these worst case scenarios. And Big Matt was willing to speak to my heart, which gave me courage. And he sat there and he told me, Matt, because I know you well enough. I know how much you and Kim love each other. Might have not got it right all the time, but I know you love her, and I know how much you want to try to make it work and be a dad. And he's like, I can tell you right now, if you don't go, I don't think you'll ever forgive yourself for it. And he's like, I know you well enough to know it's going to eat you up. And then he brought out the logical, because he could see the logical brain in me was sticking up. He said, don't worry, you got a return flight. If it goes too bad, you can just come back. Which is funny, because then when I wanted to use that return flight when I was struggling, he told me to be quiet, and I haven't tried hard enough, so. Yeah, he's a good friend. But he is, because he speaks to my heart. He knows what my heart needs to hear, and he's willing to have those hard conversations. And my dream is to have our church be a place where we help others hear the divine voice. Because wouldn't that be awesome? But it takes us being wise. It takes us admitting we don't have all the answers, which is a horrible thing to admit. None of us like it, especially with Google nowadays. If I don't know the answers, I should be able to Google it, but it doesn't always work. We have to admit we don't have all the answers. And then we have to have a willingness to have hard conversations that connect to the heart of the issue. And if we're willing to do that, I think we can help others hear the divine voice of God. By humbling ourselves, by realizing we don't have all the answers. And I can honestly say, without these two people in my life, I don't know where I would be. I can honestly say I probably wouldn't have got out of that car without Big Matt's words. I probably wouldn't have stayed in Australia when I was struggling if I hadn't called Big Matt and he had another hard conversation with me where he was full with wisdom beyond his 19-year-old self. I can honestly say without Pop's help and support when I first came here, I don't know if me and Kim would have lasted. I can honestly say if he didn't fill me with hope when he told me I had to get out by Saturday, I don't know if I would have ever called Dave Collins to say, hey, remember that one time you joked about me living with you? Could we move in? And I think he thought the same thing. Oh, he's giving me 3 weeks notice. When do you need to come in by? Saturday. It worked out well. They were going away on a trip, so it worked out. But none of that would have happened without those two people. And I guess I'm dreaming of ways for our church to have that kind of impact on so many in our community. Because wouldn't it be great if we're a church like that? If we're a church that helps others hear the divine voice by getting out of the way, by admitting we don't have all the answers, and then having heart in the conversations that connect to the heart. Because that's my dream. And I would love that to happen for us. And I'm just going to close in prayer before Kim and Brad come back up to, I think, lead us in one song. Is it one song? Is it one? Okay, it's one. It's one this time. We got it, guys. We got it. We got it. We're good. But I'm just going to close in prayer. God, I thank you so much for who you are. I thank you for your love and for your grace. I thank you that your voice is always speaking to each one of us. But sometimes, throughout all the busyness and the other noise, we can't hear it. I pray that you help us not add noise to other people's lives. I pray that you allow us the humility to admit we don't have all the answers and have the willingness to have hard conversations that connect to the heart. To learn from the influence that Eli had on Samuel. I pray that you help us dream big where we become that kind of church where people one day can stand up wherever they are and say, I don't know where I would be without that church supporting me. Without what that church did for me when I was in need. How they just showed up and sat with me. How they just cried with me. How they told me they didn't have all the answers, but they had faith and they had hope and they shared their life experiences. Are willing to have those hard conversations with me. I want that to happen one day, God, and you help us make that happen. Help us lean in to you more and more. In your amazing name, amen.